All right, today we're going to be talking about the SAML integration support that we have added to LabKey server. SAML, or Security Assertion Markup Language, is an XML data format for exchanging user authentication and information. The SAML protocol supports a wide variety of scenarios, like single sign-on, single logout, having the application initiate authentication, having a SAML server provider actually initiate an application request, then within the messages that are exchanged, the messages themselves or individual elements within the messages can be encrypted, and or they can also be digitally signed. For LabKey, we've implemented what's called SP, or Service Provider Initiated Authorization. And to show this, what would happen is the user in a web browser wants to access a resource, and LabKey, acting as the service provider, sees that the user is attempting to authenticate via a SAML request. The service provider sends a redirect to the user's browser to then redirect to a SAML identity provider. The identity provider presents its login screen, which is a challenge for credentials. The user enters their credentials and logs in. If they're successful, the identity provider then sends back to the user's web browser the instructions on where to post with the message saying that they were successfully logged in. That comes back over here to what's called the assertion consumer service, and the service provider, which again is the LabKey server application in this case, sees that the user successfully authenticated and serves the resource or page that the user was attempting to get to. The exact functionality that we've implemented for LabKey server is, as I said, it's a service provider, or SP, against a remote SAML identity provider, or IDP. In the message exchange, LabKey server requires that the response from the identity provider be signed, and then the assertion inside that response could optionally be encrypted. Another option that we have is to force the user to re-authenticate with the IDP, even if that user has already previously logged on with that identity provider. And then there's a lot more information about SAML in general and the supported functionality available on our documentation page. Now, to show a demo, what I have set up is my local instance of LabKey server that is configured to talk to a local test identity provider, which is an instance of Shibboleth, which is an open source SAML. I can actually serve as both an identity provider and service provider, but we're using it as an identity provider here today. And it itself is configured to use a local LDAP server as the user store, which is another open source product called Open LDAP. What I have here is I'm logged in as myself just through normal authentication, and I'm an administrative user, just because I wanted to show the configuration screen that we would use, where you would upload or copy-paste in the certificate file that the IDP would be using to sign the response to verify that digital signature. And then if the IDP should be encrypting the response, we would upload the encryption certificate and then also have the private key that the service provider would use to decrypt that encrypted response. Then we have the required setting of the actual location of the SAML IDP. And then optionally, we can say who the issuer URL is. Usually that's the URL of the application itself. And then we have the ability to say what the name ID format is that we're going to request. Note, whatever we actually put here means that the SAML IDP has to be configured to take that name ID format and give us back an email address. We always require in LabKey that it's the email address that we get back. And then, as I mentioned, I have the box checked here to force the user to re-authenticate, even if they've already previously logged in on that IDP and they still have an active session with the IDP. So to show this in action, I'm going to log out, and then note that I have a SAML link here. There's also, if I go just straight to the login page, I can have the option here to sign in via SAML. And this is configurable to put a logo if one wants. If there's some federated server that's used in your network as a SAML IDP, then you can put that logo there. I'm going to click this link, and I'm going to enter in the name of a SAML test user. This is the login page that's being served by the IDP. In this case, it's Shibboleth, but this would be the login page for your own IDP, and you can have it configured however the login page needs to look for your environment. If I enter the password and click Login, now I am logged into LabKey server, and I am authenticated as that test user that I was using. And that concludes the demo of our SAML integration that we're releasing in 16.2.